Hi, my name is Sam Carwin. I'm the Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Educator and Advocate at Interfaith Alliance. We're going to talk a little bit today about HIV, STIs, and STDs. First, HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. The way that HIV works is you're looking at what someone's T cell count is, and depending on that, over time, HIV can develop into AIDS, which is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. There are four ways that HIV is transmitted, one being through blood, through semen, through vaginal fluids, and through breast milk. If we're looking at those four modes of transmission, then generally how people would contract AIDS is through sex, whether it be vaginal, anal, or oral sex, through sharing needles, through a mother to a child during childbirth, or in fact through breastfeeding. And then generally speaking, those are the four ways. You can test for HIV about after 3 months, and then you're encouraged to get tested again up to 3 months later because it does take a while for antibodies to show in your system. We were able to talk a little bit about Robert Rayford, and Elijah posed for this photo. He wanted to put a face to those living with HIV as he himself was diagnosed as a teen. He believes in the power of information. Robert Rayford was born and raised in St. Louis, and he started having symptoms in 1968. So they checked him into a hospital. While he was admitted there, he had an array of doctors who worked with him. He was transferred twice to different facilities, and 15 months later, he passed away. There wasn't clear understanding of what the concern was. It was clear that there was an issue with his immune system, that he ultimately died of pneumonia, but the autopsy wasn't able to show anything clear except for he had a variety of tumors, which later would be found to be common in individuals who were diagnosed with HIV or AIDS. His story is important because though he was diagnosed almost 20 years after his death due to the doctors taking tissue samples, it showed that HIV or AIDS was actually in the country sooner than we thought it was, with him passing away, like I said, in 1969. It also showed the reality that though he lived in the Midwest, he never went outside of Chicago, that HIV and AIDS were popular throughout the country, that it was not in the US when they originally thought it was. And oftentimes it's connected to individuals who are white and men who sleep with men, where Robert Rayford was a young African American boy, just 15 when he passed away. And there's a lot of questions about how he contracted HIV. The most common thought is that he was involved in sex with men. The concern being whether that was coercive or consensual has not been identified. When they looked to study his blood, they were able to see in it that there were 9 antibodies that were common for individuals who have HIV. The test was done once in 1987. It was done again. Research came out in 1999, but it was never able to be proved without a reasonable doubt because they lost the samples of his tissue in 2005 with Katrina. This is just a chart to show some of the diagnosis of individuals who are living with HIV and what that rate has been over time. That changes from year to year with people having a better understanding of getting tested and people having a better understanding of how often, what the frequency is they should be getting tested. And the fact that though HIV is often more common in individuals who are men sleeping with men, it is something that individuals can contract regardless of who their partners are and the type of sex that they're engaging in. One person chose to share their story with you about his experience with HIV. Cliff said, "You never go into a day thinking, I'll get the worst news ever today, but it happens and we have to deal." Now, I wouldn't say being delivered the news of being HIV positive is the worst thing that could happen to me, but at the time I didn't know any different. I wasn't educated, and what I thought I knew were actually false tidbits from random TV shows and what I now know to be very inappropriate jokes from friends. For a while, I felt low, dirty, and unwanted. I cried. I was mad. I asked, why me? Time is what I needed, and time is what it took. The you'll be okays were something I hated to hear, especially from people who weren't HIV positive. They had no idea how I felt right then and there. It took time for me to accept the facts and even more time to accept myself. I took time to gather all the knowledge I could about my latest enemy. I took all the time I needed to find the right person to talk to. And now, 4 years later, and some changes later, I'm still here, still clawing to get to my dreams and not letting anything stop me. In the years I've been living with HIV, I've heard of and have seen so many people letting their status have a hold on them, let it hinder them from living their lives to the fullest. But you can't let something so easy to defeat become a supervillain to you. You can't let it scare you, and you sure can't let it win. When being first diagnosed, you may be scared, you may want to cry, but no matter how you decide to deal with the news, giving up is something that should never be an option. More recently, we now have information about PrEP, which is a way for people to prevent contracting HIV. It's a med that people can take once daily. And now we have more research that people can actually just take it a few days prior to engaging in sexual interactions and then a few days after, and that will help reduce the risk of transmission. And it's shown to be 90% effective at reducing the risk of HIV infection. It's currently prescribed for those who are considered in high risk categories, which could be men who sleep with men, people who have various partners, or individuals who are engaged in sex work. Oftentimes, when we talk about STIs and STDs, there's a difference, and people aren't always clear on what that is. Before, everything used to go under the umbrella of STDs, and more recently, we're really making that distinction because an STI is an infection, is something that is diagnosed and often treated with medication, whereas an STD is something that's seen as chronic. STI stands for sexually transmitted infection. It is commonly what we think of when we talk about chlamydia and gonorrhea, but it also includes syphilis, pubic lice, scabies, trichomoniasis, and it's very common. About 1 in 2 people will contract an an STI diagnosis before the age of 20. STDs, on the other hand, are the 4 H's, so that's herpes, HPV, HIV, and hepatitis. These are lifelong diseases, but they can be treated and managed, they can be managed with medication, though they cannot be fully treated. It's important when you're engaging in unprotected sex that you're getting tested, and the reality of when that needs to be done varies depending on what particular thing you're looking for and what it is that you come in contact with potentially. So gonorrhea can be 2 to 30 days after exposure. Trichomoniasis is generally 5 to 28 days after exposure. Chlamydia, you can test 1 to 3 weeks after exposure. Syphilis is 10 days to 3 months. Herpes is 2 weeks to 3 months. Hepatitis B is 3 weeks to 2 months. HIV is 4 weeks to 3 months. And hepatitis C is anytime up to 6 months after exposure. As you can see, it's very important that individuals are getting tested, not immediately after they come in contact, but doing that testing a few weeks after, up to months after, and generally should be getting tested every 3 months or every new partner. There are a variety of resources here in Colorado that you can get tested at the health department, and there are also resources for HIV testing, whether that be our particular Title X facility, or if that's with your private provider, you do need to ask for HIV testing. It's not something that's considered routine, though it is a routine test. So you need to ask for it specifically. And when you're engaging in sex with partners, you need to ask what they got tested for most recently and what the results of that test were.